They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings.
What if the oldest civilization in human history left behind a message that was never meant to be understood? For thousands of years, ancient Sumerian tablets have sat buried beneath the sands of Iraq, covered in mysterious symbols, forgotten names, and stories that historians have spent generations trying to decipher. But now, artificial intelligence may have changed everything. According to claims surrounding Grok AI, ancient Sumerian texts have been analyzed in ways that were previously impossible. And what researchers allegedly discovered has sent shockwaves through the debate over human origins. The tablets speak of beings who came from the heavens. They describe the creation of humanity. They mention beings known as the Anunnaki, and in some interpretations they appear to tell a story that sounds disturbingly similar to modern theories about genetic manipulation, advanced technology, and the possibility that humanity's origins may be far more mysterious than we ever imagined. But here's where things become truly disturbing. Are these ancient texts describing real events? Were the Sumerians recording encounters with advanced beings? Or are modern audiences simply forcing futuristic ideas onto ancient mythology? And perhaps the biggest question of all, did Grok AI actually uncover something historians missed for thousands of years? Or is the internet turning ancient mythology into a story far more sensational than the evidence allows? Before we explore that in detail, make sure to subscribe to the channel. So, let's begin and uncover what the ancient Sumerian tablets really have to say. The tablets that time locked away. For more than a century, archaeologists uncovered thousands of Sumerian texts from the ruins of Eridu and Nippur. Many were broken into fragments, while others sat untouched in museum storage rooms, untranslated, mislabeled, or forgotten. Cuneiform, the world's oldest known writing system, was notoriously difficult to work with. Its symbols could shift in meaning depending on context, and many of its words had no modern equivalent. Even when the signs were legible, the grammar often made little sense. Generations of scholars spent entire careers translating only fragments, never managing to piece together a full picture. Because of this, the world never saw the story in its entirety. That changed in 2025. Machine learning models trained on thousands of cuneiform inscriptions were released to researchers. These models did more than translate signs. They identified missing symbols, predicted broken endings, and cross-referenced dialects from Akkadian, Babylonian, and Old Sumerian. Suddenly, tablets that had been silent for 4 millennia began to speak again, and what they revealed was nothing like what experts had expected. For years, these texts had been dismissed as poetic creation myths. But once AI restored and compared them, hidden details surfaced. The tablets contained records, detailed ones. They described labor systems, classifications of people, and procedures involving blood, clay, and purpose. Some tablets listed these details in repetitive sequences, while others told them in a narrative form. But across all of them, consistent patterns appeared. The first shock was the discovery of multiple origin stories. The tablets did not treat humanity as a single invention. They used different terms, each tied to a role or function. They spoke of shaping forms after the likeness of the divine, but dividing them immediately by purpose. Humanity, according to these texts, was not created as one people. It was separated from the very beginning, and at least one group described more than once was created with obedience as its defining trait. Artificial intelligence flagged several recurring terms that stood out. One phrase loosely translated to function-bearing life. Another referred to those who do not multiply. A third, chillingly, was clay of lower glow. Scholars had long assumed these phrases were poetic or symbolic. But when AI reconstructed them in context, a different meaning appeared. Some researchers now believe these lines describe early humans engineered without the ability to reproduce. If true, this would mean they were deliberately designed as a temporary workforce, never intended to survive long enough to pass their traits on. The more fragments AI restored, the clearer the overall message became. Humanity was not the product of a single act of creation. Instead, it was a process. People were shaped, adjusted, broken down, and rebuilt. Some versions were discarded entirely, erased before they could leave a lasting mark on history. The idea that our species was divided before it had even begun was once considered fringe speculation. Now, the tablets themselves pointed to it. There were classifications, names, and descriptions. And for the first time, there was technology powerful enough to stitch the fragments together into a coherent whole. AI had not invented these ideas. It had revealed them. It turned scattered myths into something closer to a blueprint. And that blueprint did more than describe how humans were created. It outlined with unsettling clarity what they were created to do. Humans were created, but never as a single species. The story always sounded simple. The gods shaped mankind from clay. But the newly decoded tablets reveal something entirely different, something far more complex and much more unsettling. They don't describe one single act of creation. They describe phases, tests, failed attempts, and, most importantly, different versions. Humans, according to these writings, weren't made as one race. They were prototypes and designs. Every group was crafted for a separate purpose. They weren't created only to work. Each had specific physical roles assigned. The tablets also use different names for these early humans, words that were long believed to simply mean people. But AI detected important differences. Some passages use Lulu, a term loosely translated as man, while others use Sag-Gig, which one Sumerologist once interpreted as the black-headed people. Almost no one paid attention to that phrase for years, but AI linked it to another passage describing a group chosen for labor, with bodies formed from dark clay and eyes that were never questioned. Were these symbolic divisions, or were they actual physical traits? No one knows with certainty. But the fact that the texts make such a strong distinction points to something deeper, that even in humanity's earliest beginning, there were groups and roles people were created for and never meant to escape. And that's only the beginning. Other tablets describe the gods judging how each group performed. One passage speaks of the clay of restless voice, a version of humanity that rejected orders and was thrown into the rivers. Another mentions a group whose limbs were too fragile to carry tools and were returned to the mountains to disappear. It's difficult not to see it as a kind of system or program, one that begins with a goal and solves it not by creating equals, but by producing specialized tools, tools that looked exactly like us. The tablets mention a place called Iden, a flat land between two rivers believed to have served as a factory floor. Every time a group was created, the gods tested them, named them, and sometimes erased them. None of these patterns were obvious before AI translated the tablets side by side. Scholars only saw scattered fragments, but now we're beginning to understand what those fragments truly meant. And what they suggest is that there wasn't one single origin of mankind. There were many, some erased, some altered, and some still carrying the traits placed within them from the very beginning. The genetic changes that came next. The first humans weren't enough. That's exactly what the tablets describe. They worked, they obeyed, but they didn't survive for long. They couldn't reproduce. Everyone had to be created by hand, shaped from clay, blood, and divine command. They also weren't permitted to multiply. That restriction was built into the design. It kept the gods firmly in control. But somewhere along the way, that control began to fade. The tablets never explain exactly why. Some believe it was because of rebellion. Others point to exhaustion. Too many humans were dying, and too few could be created quickly enough. Whatever the reason, the process could no longer continue. So another change was made. The tablets describe it clearly. Enki, the god of wisdom, chose to redesign the model. This time, he wouldn't simply create humans, he would improve them. The new version would be wiser, stronger, capable of surviving on its own, and, most importantly, able to reproduce. A new being was brought into existence. His name was Adapa. Unlike the others, Adapa wasn't a worker. He wasn't shaped only for labor. He was something greater. Described in the texts as the chief among men, Adapa was said to possess divine vision and words that could move the heavens. He could speak, think, and lead. His mind was sharp enough to understand the will of the gods and carry it out. But even Adapa's wisdom had its limits. He was created to know much, but never everything. And when the time came to test that obedience, the outcome became permanent. According to the tablets, the story unfolds like this. Adapa was called to the heavens, where Anu, the sky god, offered him the food of eternal life. But before he left, Enki warned him not to eat or drink and to reject everything offered. So when the moment arrived, Adapa obeyed. He turned away immortality. And in that instant, humanity's chance at freedom disappeared. One choice, one command obeyed, and it sealed our destiny forever. The tablets also reveal that Enki gave Adapa knowledge, but withheld true freedom. Whether it was deception or protection, no one can say. But the outcome was clear. Humans would now live. They would grow, but they would also die forever. That's what made Adapa different. He became the bridge, the dividing line between a tool and a true species. And his creation marked the beginning of something even more dangerous, division. Because not everyone received the same improvement. Some groups of humans remained bound, destined for labor, unable to think beyond the work they were given. Others, modeled after Adapa, were granted greater independence. They could learn, adapt, and even lead. That divide, almost invisible in the myths, becomes unmistakable through the AI's analysis, because now every reference can be read together. Now we can see which groups were given opportunities and which were simply assigned a purpose. The roots of inequality reach far deeper than history. They trace back to the very first decisions not to give everyone the same opportunity. And those choices would soon ignite a conflict, not only between humans and gods, but among the gods themselves. Anunnaki divisions, control versus freedom. Not every god agreed on what humanity should become. The Sumerian texts don't hide this part. They clearly describe a divide, a deep conflict over whether humans should remain tied to the purpose they were created for or be allowed to grow beyond it. On one side stood Enki, the same god who created Adapa, the one who gave humanity reproduction, wisdom, and speech. Enki saw the possibility. He saw a species capable of thinking, adapting, and evolving. In some texts, he's even called the father of humanity. His version of creation wasn't flawless, but it was compassionate. On the other side stood Enlil, the guardian of divine order, the keeper of decrees, the god who demanded absolute obedience. Where Enki saw tools that could grow, Enlil saw disorder waiting to unfold. He didn't trust humans, he didn't want them to advance, and he deeply opposed what Enki had done. The texts describe Enlil's anger as swift and complete. To Enlil, humans had become defiant. They were breaking the design and disrupting the established order. And Enki, in his eyes, had crossed the line. So the gods became divided. Some stood beside Enki, quietly supporting the growth of human knowledge. Others remained loyal to Enlil, demanding limits, resets, and punishment. The result was a division not only in the heavens, but across the earth. Some humans were guided through dreams, taught the secrets of stars and seeds, and gifted with writing, mathematics, and metalworking. Others were held back, forced into labor. Their bloodlines remained simple, silent, and tightly controlled. AI translations reveal remarkable differences in how the earliest groups were treated. In one region, humans were described as guardians of grain and creators of laws. In another, they appeared as unnamed laborers whose history was erased from the moment they were born. This wasn't natural progress. It was controlled development and carefully designed inequality. And it was fueled by a divine conflict that continued to grow. At its height, the tablets describe a final breaking point. Enlil, enraged that humans had continued to increase in numbers and knowledge, made one last decision to destroy them through the Great Flood. Enlil's flood wasn't meant to cleanse the earth. It was meant to end a project that had gone too far, erase what he considered a failure, and restore the original order. But once again, Enki stepped in. He chose a man and warned him. That man, remembered in later traditions as Ziusudra, Utnapishtim, or Noah, became the final link in humanity's survival. Enki didn't save everyone. He couldn't. But he saved enough. Enough to continue the bloodline and preserve the version of humanity he believed deserved to exist. But the conflict never truly ended. It simply took on a new form. Advanced tech in the wrong hands. The stories of creation were strange enough, but what came next was something entirely different. Buried deep within the tablets, hidden between creation hymns and divine bloodlines, were passages that didn't sound like myths at all. They read like records, descriptions of tools, materials, and systems that seemed impossible for their time. And now, with the help of AI, those passages are finally becoming clear, and they're raising questions no one can completely answer. How could a civilization from 5,000 years ago describe flight? How could they understand how metals respond to heat? How could they speak of energy so intense it turned daylight into fire? One passage describes vehicles with wings of wood and metal racing across the sky, powered not by wind but by fire burning within. Another tells of a liquid metal sealed inside a chamber of heat, driven by pulse and thunder. For years, those words were dismissed as poetry. But when examined together, AI recognized a pattern. The same elements appeared again and again: wings, containers, heat, propulsion, and thunder. The texts never claimed these devices were imaginary. They said they were gifts from the gods, not for everyone, but only for those judged worthy, those loyal to divine order, and those who had proven their value. Knowledge, according to the Sumerian tablets, wasn't discovered. It was distributed and then turned into a weapon. AI identified a group of passages describing a light that scorched the earth and left no flesh behind. Another speaks of mountains torn apart by fire and cities that disappeared in a single day. To mainstream scholars, these have always been viewed as metaphors for storms or natural disasters, but others remain unconvinced. Some researchers now believe the texts describe technologies that wouldn't appear again for thousands of years: advanced metallurgy, directed energy, and even atmospheric flight. Even more unusual, this knowledge wasn't shared equally. Some human groups received these tools. Others were intentionally kept from them. What kind of civilization gives metallurgy to one group while denying another even the gift of language? The answer, it seems, is a civilization that wasn't built naturally. One designed from the top down, with humans placed not at the center, but at the very bottom. And even within that system, equality didn't exist. Some were destined to lead, while others were created to serve. And those who questioned any of it simply vanished from history. One line quietly states, "They were shown the mountain, and the mountain did not return them." We don't know exactly what those words mean, but we do know this. The more AI translates, the more obvious the pattern becomes. Technology in the ancient world wasn't treated as a miracle. It became a tool used to separate one kind of human from another. And soon, that separation would reach even further, extending beyond work, knowledge, or loyalty, and into time itself. The Sumerian warning. The Sumerians weren't simply builders, record-keepers, or worshippers. They were observers. That's what the tablets reveal once AI brings all the scattered fragments together. The Sumerians didn't just look at the stars. They carefully tracked them. For 7 centuries, priests in cities like Ur and Babylon recorded eclipses, planetary alignments, and even the subtle movements of distant stars, all without telescopes and without modern mathematics. They believed the sky wasn't merely decoration, it was a message, and they were waiting for something. The name that appears again and again is Nibiru, a celestial body said to follow a vast orbit, returning every 3,600 years. Ancient scholars once dismissed it as mythology. But now, AI has uncovered something different. Repeated references to cycles and long-term patterns, warnings connected not only to Nibiru's return, but also to what follows it. The texts don't describe Nibiru as a planet. They call it the crossing, the destroyer, the one who veils the light. And each time it returns, something changes. As AI reconstructs the missing passages, a pattern begins to appear. The warnings weren't intended for everyone. Only certain humans were entrusted with them. The texts describe those chosen by Enki as watchers, guardians, silent observers who lived on the edges of society, passing coded stories from one generation to the next. According to these translations, the return of Nibiru wasn't only about destruction. It marked the moment when the old order was erased and a new one replaced it. And every time it happened, humanity forgot, and the stories slowly disappeared. But one thing always remained: the division. The belief that some groups were never meant to survive these resets, that the ancient creators may have designed certain people for extinction and others for survival. Humanity's forgotten divisions. The Sumerian tablets don't describe humanity as one united creation. Instead, they present people as being created in separate groups, each designed for a specific role, for obedience, and even for a particular purpose. This division wasn't simply about culture or tribe. It appears to have been something much deeper, woven into the earliest stages of human existence. The texts never use modern terms like race or ethnicity. Instead, they use classifications. These classifications aren't random. They follow a pattern repeated across dozens of surviving tablet fragments. Those fragments come from different regions, yet they all reflect the same structure. In one passage, a group is called the clay of strength. Another refers to the blood of brightness. A third describes the shadow-formed ones of silent hands. For many years, scholars believed these phrases were poetic metaphors. But when artificial intelligence compared hundreds of these passages side by side, the context changed completely. The pattern was far too consistent to ignore. Every group was given assigned traits, assigned responsibilities, and even assigned limitations. The clay of strength are described as miners and laborers. They were responsible for demanding physical work, and there is no mention of them holding leadership positions or using written language. The blood of brightness appears in priestly roles. They were responsible for writing, chanting, and observing the stars. Their duties were closely connected to ritual and knowledge. The shadow-formed ones are described as caretakers of animals. They were specifically forbidden from entering temples or handling sacred objects. The texts don't stop at describing duties. In several passages, these groups are also connected to unusual physical traits. One description speaks of those from the scorched horizon, marked by sun and earth. Another refers to the pale dwelling ones, born of stone and wind. A third mentions the red soil walkers, hardened by a land without water. For centuries, these names were viewed as poetic expressions or symbolic labels, but AI's analysis reveals a consistent connection between these names, their assigned roles, and their described physical characteristics. Taken together, they no longer seem like scattered mythology. They begin to look like carefully defined groups of people, each created with a specific purpose. This new perspective is only possible because the tablets can finally be studied as one complete record. In the past, scholars worked with isolated fragments. A passage from one city-state might never have been directly compared with a passage from another. AI changed that by building a single cross-referenced record using pattern recognition, language modeling, and side-by-side translations. The scattered fragments became part of one connected system. What once appeared to be disconnected myths now reads more like a record of origins, and that record points towards something unsettling. Not every group was meant to develop in the same way. Some were taught language while others were not. Some received knowledge of astronomy, while others were warned never to look toward the sky. Some were given personal names, others were identified only by the work they performed. The roles were never equal, and the restrictions were intentional. If this system was designed on purpose, then its implications are difficult to overlook. The foundation of what we now think of as race may not simply be the result of migration, mutation, or chance. It may instead trace back to an organized system of control, one that began long before recorded history. Artificial intelligence didn't create this idea. It only revealed the patterns that had always existed within the tablets, and those patterns suggest that humanity's divisions didn't begin with borders, tribes, or wars. They began with planning and assigned roles. They began with deliberate decisions made at the very beginning of human existence. And those decisions, preserved in the earliest records, lead toward a conclusion that's difficult to ignore. The hands that shaped the first of us may never have intended humanity to be equal. The AI era begins. We were never meant to see the complete story. For thousands of years, the tablets remained half-buried beneath ancient ruins. Those who discovered them couldn't read them. Those who could read them couldn't complete them. And those who finally completed them were never able to connect every piece until now. But who was this knowledge really meant for? Why was it buried? And why, after thousands of years, is it emerging again today? Some scholars argue this is nothing more than mythology, that these stories were always symbolic, that the gods never truly existed, and that the references to roles and races are simply ancient metaphors for power. Others aren't convinced, because when the myths are compared with archaeology and the descriptions are placed beside migrations, bloodlines, and the unexplained leaps in human development, the similarities become difficult to dismiss. This isn't really about whether Enki and Enlil were real. It's about whether someone or something shaped the origin of our species with a specific purpose in mind. What, then, do we become? What began as a simple AI translation has turned into a reflection of our own humanity. The Sumerians didn't leave behind only clay tablets and symbols. They left a record of control, a history of division, and a warning we nearly failed to notice. What do we do with that knowledge? What changes when a species discovers the story of why it was created? and which version of humanity was always meant to survive?